Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to another WaxMode video review. And I've got a couple products that were sent over to me by Xtreme Solutions that I'm going to be covering in this video here. They sent me their LVR 357 Magnum Wax, and then one of the most highly requested products that I've seen in my comment section in my videos has been their Polyseal Hydropolymer Spray Sealant. And so in this video, I'm going to show you guys their initial hydrophobic performance on the test panel. I'm also going to pull out Poorboy's rolled strip down to show you how they hold up in the stripping test. And then I'm going to do an application demonstration to show you how easy they are to apply to the paint. The pricing on these products, Magnum Wax is going to run you $25 for the 16-ounce bottle. Polyseal is going to run you $17 for the 16-ounce bottle here. Pretty decent pricing. Is going to be competitive with a lot of the other products that are on the market. Now, Polyseal here is going to be much different than your typical standard spray sealant or spray wax. This is going to be a wet application product. You don't want to apply this dry to the paint and then buff it in with the dry microfiber towel. It's not going to work like that. You want to have that damp microfiber towel to assist in working this into the paint or buffing this off from the paint. And it's a pretty unique style of application, and I found that when you follow their application instructions, you're not going to have any problems working this into the paint. Now, the prep for this specific test was a little bit different. I used Griot's Perfecting Cream as my abrasive, and then I followed that up with CarPro Eraser as my panel wipe. Then I applied 2 coats of the Magnum Wax across the entire hood. And I waited 24 hours before applying the second coat on top of the previous coat. Then I waited 24 hours and applied Polyseal on just the left half of the paint here. And I really wanted to see how Polyseal is going to react on top of a base layer of the Magnum Wax. And in the future, I might come out with a video that showcases how Polyseal behaves by itself or perhaps side by side next to a product like the Meguiar's Hybrid Ceramic Wax. I think the two of these products are very comparable, but they're definitely not identical. Polyseal is very different than Hybrid Ceramic Wax, but the two of them fulfill a similar role in the way that I would be using them. And here's a bit of a look of the walk-around of the gloss that is left behind on the paint after applying these to the surface. And both of these are going to be very comparable in terms of gloss. Both of them are going to be very competitive with other products on the market as well. And the paint is piping hot at this point. So 173 degrees Fahrenheit surface temperatures on the paint before I do the rinse. Now, this rinse is going to be 24 hours since I applied Polyseal to the left half of the paint. And the reason that I'm doing a layering style test here is that's the way that I'm going to protect my own paint. I want to have that one protectant that I apply after I polish the paint and after I do a full detail on it. That's going to be my main form of protection. Then I'm going to want to have a separate product to maintain the paint on a regular basis or on an occasional basis to help keep up on the slickness, on the gloss, and to top up on some of that protection. So that two-way system of protection and maintenance is a very functional system. And so I think the Magnum Wax as that main protectant with the Polyseal on top for maintenance is going to be a very good system that's going to perform well for a lot of guys out there. And Magnum Wax is supposed to last for over 6 months. Polyseal is supposed to last for up to 3 months. So that's going to be the durability range for these style of protectants. This clip here is after washing the paint using CarPro Reset as my soap. And what I'm noticing with the hydrophobics for each product is the Polyseal definitely has a higher hydrophobic limit. It's going to be more hydrophobic in the short term compared to the Magnum Wax. And that's very common. You're going to have a lot of liquid paint sealants that are not going to be quite as hydrophobic as less durable spray toppers and less durable spray protectants. And the Magnum Wax is going to be on an amino resin reinforced acrylic formula. So that's going to have better protective components inside of that formula compared to what you're going to get out of the SiO2 infused polymer wax-based system of Polyseal. And so just because Polyseal is more hydrophobic, it doesn't mean it's a better form of protection compared to what you're going to get out of applying Magnum Wax first after you polish the paint. But my thoughts here after washing the paint with CarPro Reset, this is definitely good hydrophobics left behind on the paint. It's not the best I've seen. It's far from the best, and it's definitely not the worst that I've seen. But it's a good water behavior, and I'm definitely going to supplement the Magnum Wax. If I'm using Magnum Wax as my main protectant, I'm definitely going to be using Polyseal on a regular basis. I think that's a very good system. One of the things that I can be critical of Xtreme Solutions for is their product branding and their labeling. Obviously, I think Xtreme Solutions is focused in on getting products out there and building their lineup up. And hopefully what I see from them in the future is focusing in on the labeling and the branding and getting the bottles to look attractive, because in today's detailing market, it's not just about how good your product is. You want to get something that's going to capture the attention of guys. I want to have something that looks good on the shelf and not just performs good on the paint. But I definitely like how they smell. I think Magnum Wax smells, really good. It's got kind of like this original Pez candy smell. I like it a lot. I think it smells great. This clip here is going to cover the Poorboy strip down test. I'm going to show you guys exactly how each section is held up after dumping strip down onto the paint and then working it in with the wash mitt using CarPro Reset as my soap. Now for this specific test using strip down, what I've done is I've fully saturated the entire panel with strip down. However, I've only agitated the product into the middle section of the paint, in between the crease lines there. That's the only sections where I've fully agitated it in using the wash mitt and CarPro Reset. The edges of this panel, I've just sprayed strip down on the surface and I'm going to rinse it right off through this rinse here. So I'm very interested in the difference in the performance between actually agitating that product that's designed to try and remove waxes and sealants from the paint compared to just spraying that type of product on and rinsing it off the surface after allowing it to dwell for a couple minutes or so. And what I'm noticing after this rinse here is there is a bit of that difference between the 2 coats of Magnum Wax on the left half topped with Polyseal compared to just the 2 coats of Magnum Wax by itself on the right half. The left half with Polyseal looks like it's slightly more resistant against the strip down test compared to just Magnum Wax by itself. This is another reason why you would tend to want to use toppers on a regular basis to supplement the performance of your base layer protectant. And then the outer edges of this panel here where I've just sprayed strip down on a surface have held up much better compared to the middle section where I have fully agitated strip down into the paint using the wash mitt. This clip here is a follow-up wash using CarPro Reset. I want to remove any remnants left behind by strip down if they're still possibly latching onto the paint, just to give me a better idea of how each section is held up. And what I'm noticing after this test here is this is definitely chemically resistant to a certain extent. It's not going to be the best level of chemical resistance. It's not going to be able to compete against something like Turtle Wax's Ice Seal and Shine in the short term. Seal and Shine is definitely going to be much more resistant against strip down, even that full agitation of strip down towards the middle section. But this is not crazy hydrophilic, so there's still some evidence of survivability on the paint after agitating strip down onto the surface there. This clip here is going to cover the application demo for both Magnum Wax and Polyseal. I'm going to apply them in direct sunlight on crazy hot paint. You guys can see here the surface temperatures of the paint right now is in between 164 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which is crazy hot. You definitely don't want to be doing this in direct sunlight on paint this hot. But number one, I want to see if Magnum Wax and Polyseal can handle paint that's hot like this in direct sunlight on this test panel and see if I can get these to apply and remove from the paint without too much trouble. Now you want to make sure you guys shake your bottles up well before using the product. You always want to make sure there's no product separation going on before working with them. And you guys can see here I've applied a fairly liberal amount of Magnum Wax to the face of the pad there. And what I like to do is I like to take the applicator, I like to fold it in over on self to get a nice even coat of product applied to the entire face of it. Now, what I've noticed out of Magnum Wax is I don't have to be crazy sensitive to how much I'm applying to the face of the pad before I start spreading it across the paint. Some products you have to be very extremely sensitive to how much you put on. If you put on too much of the applicator pad, you can have a hell of a time trying to buff that off cleanly from the paint. I like that about Magnum Wax, and I hate the fact that with some products I have to be very sensitive and apply just a crazy tiny amount to the face of the pad, and then I got to be super careful with how I work with that product. I hate those products like that. Magnum Wax is not like that. You can apply a fairly liberal amount, get good coverage across the face of your pad, and you're not going to have trouble buffing this off the paint. Now, I prepped this panel out beforehand using Griot's Perfecting Cream, followed up with CarPro Eraser as a panel wipe, so the paint was nice and bare, and Magnum Wax spreads absolutely effortlessly across the paint, and it's super smooth. There's nothing grabby about it. There's nothing tacky. The applicator pad is not getting stuck. I don't have to go back and reload product into the pad itself. There was enough product to actually do the entire hood with as much as I put on the face of the pad there. And Magnum Wax will also dry and haze over as it sits onto the paint before you buff it off. Xtreme Solutions recommends in between 10 to 15 minutes to allow Magnum Wax to dry onto the paint before you start to buff it off. That's in regular conditions. Now for me, It's going to take a lot less than 10 minutes before I start to buff this off from the paint in this temperature. So that's going to fluctuate, guys, depending on your environment, depending on how hot the paint is before you start working on it. But what I notice out of this Magnum Wax here is that initial wipe off of the crust of the wax is super easy. It feels like it's just effortless. It's just gliding across the paint, and I'm not feeling any sort of resistance where the wax is. One of the things that I do notice when I'm working in direct sunlight like this on paint that's this hot with this wax is I'm seeing a bit more residuals left behind on the paints. Usually when I'm inside of the garage, out of the sun, on temperatures it's a lot cooler, I get a cleaner wipe off with less residuals left behind on the paint. You guys can kind of see that shifting in the sunlight right there. That's a bit of the residuals left behind. Usually this wipes off super cleanly for me. And so this is the cost of working in direct sunlight. And this is still not bad at all. These residuals are not anything that's going to cause significant streaking. And a lot of waxes will have oils and residuals left behind like this as you buff them off from the paint. And so I'm definitely impressed with Magnum Wax's user friendliness. Its on-off application is very good, and its ability to actually work very well in direct sunlight like this. But moving on to PolySeal. Now again, this is a much different form of spray sealant that most guys are used to working with. You want to work wet when you're using PolySeal. So what you want to do is you want to rinse the entire panel down. Then you're going to take a fully damp microfiber towel and you're going to spray PolySeal directly into that damp microfiber towel. Then you're going to spread it across the surface. And then after that, you can follow up that with a fully dry microfiber towel to give it a final wipe down. So you can kind of use PolySeal as your drying aid, but the difference is you're going to be spraying PolySeal directly into your towel and not directly onto the surface of the paint. Now this rinse here is again after applying Perfecting Cream as my abrasive onto the paint, following that up with CarPro Eraser. So I want you guys to pay attention to the water behavior now compared to the behavior after I've applied PolySeal on top. And so this amount of water that I have left on the surface is going to be plenty for my first application of PolySeal. I don't want to have too much water on the surface. That's going to end up diluting PolySeal as I try spreading it across the paint. And then from here, I've got a microfiber towel that's been soaking in a bucket of water. I'm going to wring it out. I'm going to spray PolySeal directly into the towel, apply it to the paint. Then I'm going to grab a final dry microfiber towel. And that's going to be the official regular way to apply PolySeal to your paint. But I think that this method right here is a good way. If you're working in direct sunlight, this can be a good method to use to help prevent streaking. But if I'm out of this direct sunlight, if I'm in the garage and I'm working on paint that's in a good environment, I can apply this dry to the paint. I can spray it directly onto the paint as well. You want to make sure you manage your overspray. And I can work this in dry as long as I have a damp or a wet microfiber towel to follow up after a dry application of PolySeal. I can still get very good results without streaking. And if you want to apply PolySeal with a foam-based applicator pad, you want to apply it dry, you can do that as long as you have a wet or a damp microfiber towel to give it that final, or to give it a follow-up wipe down, and then dry the paint off afterwards. I found that I'm not seeing any sort of negative result. Now that might be different if you're working in direct sunlight. If you're working on hotter temperatures, you don't want to apply this dry to the paint on hot paint. Or directly onto the surface of the paint and then work it in like that. You could definitely run into streaking like that, but if you're careful, if you're in the garage, if you're out of the direct sunlight, you have options to be able to play around with this product and still get great results. Now, the microfiber towel that I'm using right here is a fully dry towel to give it that final wipe off, and it's just a super slick surface left behind right now. The paint feels absolutely fantastic. It's a night and day difference between how polished paint feels after using an IPA wipe down compared to how the surface feels after applying PolySeal down onto the paint and then following up using that dry microfiber towel. And I love it. I mean, both Magnum Wax and PolySeal feel very slick on the paint, feel great. Now on this point of the video here, I'm going to do a final rinse of PolySeal, and I'm just going to check to see if there's any uneven bonding of the product on the surface. This is not something that you have to do after applying PolySeal. You don't have to rinse it off the surface. I'm just checking to see if there's any weak areas where the water behavior is not as good in those areas compared to other areas. And anytime you're working wet with products, you kind of have the ability for the product to not bond as effectively in some of those areas on the paint where it's been more wet compared to other drier areas. But I'm pretty surprised at how well both of these are holding up. even though I'm rinsing them immediately after applying them to the paint without any sort of curing time given for the products to actually settle down and cure onto the paint, especially with Magnum Wax. Magnum Wax is very hydrophobic and it's performing very well immediately after applying it to the paint. Usually this has a 24-hour to a 48-hour curing time. And so if we happen to hit a rainstorm shortly after applying these products to the paint, I would not be worried about that destroying their performance at all. Alright guys, so to wrap this video up, I've definitely been enjoying both Magnum Wax and Polyseal. I think these have the user friendliness that a lot of guys are going to be attracted towards. They both smell great, they're both super slick, super easy to work with. I didn't have troubles working in direct sunlight and on crazy hot paint, as you guys can see. And I think the gloss looks fantastic as well. But check in the link in the description down below. I'll send you over to the Xtreme Solutions website if you guys are interested in trying these products out. And this video is not a paid sponsorship. I'm not receiving payment for doing a video review of these products. Aaron at Xtreme Solutions reached out to me and was willing to send me some of their products. I told him that a ton of guys wanted me to try out Polyseal, so I appreciate them sending me some of their products to try out, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear you guys' feedback. Definitely stay tuned for more testing coming up in the future, guys. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next video.